Tomorrow is Easter. And I cannot wait for the 18th when our whole church will be celebrating Easter with a very special program that they have been preparing for weeks, and I cannot wait to be here on that day. You know, Easter is arguably one of the most significant holidays to the Christians. I remember when my kids were little, we always dressed them up nicely to church for the Easter Sabbath. And then on Sunday, they would be bringing their Easter baskets, picking up, the Easter eggs that we'd spent the whole week decorating. Well, this celebration brings joy and a sense of celebration. Do they really represent the meaning of Easter? Today, I asked Gina to have a picture of the empty tomb, because to me, that's what Easter really means. Because of the empty tomb, we have hope, even though we're living in this messy world. Because of his resurrection, we can have peace, even during the most troubling times of our lives, like today. Billy Graham once said, God proved his love on the cross. When Jesus Christ hung and bled and died, it was God saying to the world, I love you. Isn't that marvelous? That we have a God who loves us. To me, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is really another opportunity to start anew. I know when New Year comes, we like to have a fresh start. But I believe that when Easter comes, we also need to have a fresh start, because we have to remember the one who died on the cross for us. And it is time to be joyful, to be happy. It means forgetting the shadowed past and moving on to a much better Christ-centered life. So I titled my sermon today as Finding Joy in a Messy World, because I have given out books to the ladies about how we are living in a messy world today. And our memory verse is Philippians 4:4-6. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Do not be anxious on anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition and thanksgiving present your requests to God. The first verse says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Why is it repeated? I think it's repeated because there's an emphasis that we really have to be happy. We really have to rejoice because of the gift that we have been given. Sometimes people ask you, what do you really want out of life? Most people will say, I just really want to be happy. Sometimes we don't really want to admit it, that we really do want to be happy. Is it really possible to be happy in what's going on in the world around today? There was a man who was very unhappy. He was very unhappy with his wife. He was very unhappy with his children. He was very unhappy at his workplace. He was just unhappy about everything. So he decided he wants to get away from it all. So he joined a mute monastery. Do you know that there is a mute monastery where they have to take a vow of silence for 5 years? So that's where he went. And he was told when he went in there that for 5 years he has to have a vow of silence, and he's allowed only to say 2 words after 5 years. When 5 years was over, the supervisor called him, the boss, and said, now you can say 2 words. And the man said, bad food. Another 5 years passed. He had to go back to the office again, and he said, now what's your 2 words? He survived the next 5 years, and he said, hard bed. Another 5 years passed, and once again he was called in to the office, and he said, now, what's your 2 words? And he said, I quit. And his supervisor said, "Well, I'm not surprised. You have done nothing but complain." All men seek happiness, and they thought they could escape from the turmoils of the world. But we really can't. But in spite of the messy world we live in, we ought to be joyful because he lives. Our Redeemer lives. Joy is a feeling of great pleasure, of happiness when life is great. Like when you're on vacation, aren't you so happy when you're on vacation? Or when you are healthy and enjoying life. You cannot be happy though when you have a migraine or vertigo. You know, it just doesn't happen that way, right? So what really makes you happy? If you know me, what makes you happy?
The friendship of Jesus and my friends.
Okay, friends do make you happy. How about you, Gina? What makes you happy?
Plants and flowers.
You're just like me, plants. You know, it's funny to know that the things that make us happy are really ordinary things. They're very simple things. I'm always happy when it's sunny. I even feel more happy when there was snow and then the following day the sun is shining. It's such a great feeling. Or the sound of a child's laughter. Or when I see Sebastian walking in with a smile on his face, that just makes me happy. Or the smell of food. You know, when you smell scrambled eggs in the morning when you're still sleepy and then, oh, there's something smelling in the kitchen. There are so many simple things that can make us happy. Can you imagine what life would be without the ordinary little things that make us happy? Can you imagine if there's someone kicking at your front door while you are worshiping because it's forbidden? Happiness in life really depends on cultivating the ability to notice ordinary things in life and realizing that if you don't have them, they wouldn't be so ordinary. So my suggestion is that we list those ordinary things and make them feel special. I remember when my husband was undergoing treatment at VCU, we live in the doorways. It's a building where those who are sick and cannot be away from the hospital has to stay. So for the first 30 days during his treatment, I cannot be away 10 miles from the hospital. So we lived in these doorways. And so you can imagine the people living in the doorways are all very sad because they have a husband or a child who is dying in the hospital. They have someone in ICU who's fighting for his life. So it's a place where most people are really very sad. You know, so I was there for 5 months. But then there's this old black lady, she's probably in her 80s. Her husband was also undergoing treatment and very, very sick. He was in the ICU most of the time. He was diagnosed with the same diagnosis of my husband. But you know what this little lady does while we're in the doorways? He cooks every day for us. Because this place has a kitchen where we can cook, prepare our food. We don't even have to cook because she was cooking. She keeps herself busy. And I told her, aren't you scared of your husband dying? And here you are, always happy, singing while cooking. And then she said, well, why not? God is in control. He knows what's best for my husband. And all I can do is to serve those who need my help. Isn't that wonderful that someone could think of that even when the world around her is turning upside down? So how can we cultivate a greater capacity for happiness? I have listed a few, and number one is by being grateful for the little ordinary things that God has given us. After all, happiness is contentment, realizing that God has already given us what we most needed. I don't know about you, but growing up, I've always loved the story of Joni Eareckson. Do you know? Yes, I just love the story of Joni Eareckson. She was born in 1949 in Baltimore, Maryland, And when she was 17 years old, she was in a diving accident that made her paraplegic. She couldn't feel anything, her neck and below. Can you imagine a teenager, 17 years old, where, she broke her back and she was paralyzed from the shoulders down. So you can imagine how the depression she has been through. She underwent so much that there were periods in her life that she just wanted to die. But she found her deep faith in God. And that's what made her going on. And in fact, she learned how to paint with a paintbrush on her mouth because she cannot feel anything down. And she became a very famous artist because of that. And now she has actually defined, the doctors thought that because of her paraplegia, she might not live long enough. That's why she said, then I'm dedicating my life to serving those who are in need, those who are suffering like me, with disabilities. But guess what? Last year, she celebrated her 76th birthday. And she spent her whole life serving those who needed her help. And this is what she said. You will find in Jesus the true happiness that you've always longed for. Only in Jesus. Suffering and joy are two strands of a single fiber. Joy thrives in the midst of suffering, for it is not rooted in circumstances, but is born of the knowledge that God is present in every moment of our lives. That was her secret to being happy her whole life. Second, there is really joy in knowing Jesus. We always say that as a Christian, that knowing Christ doesn't really mean that only Christians are happy people. Because I know that I have so many friends who are Muslims and Buddhists, and I think they're happier than some Christians I know. I remember my mom used to say when we are pouting or we're not happy going to church or doing church activities, they would say, are you a sad Adventist? Because we're supposed to be glad Adventists. So it's a word that has always been with me, when I don't feel like doing something, I said, I ought to be happy because I'm a glad Adventist. My favorite story in the Bible, my favorite character in the Bible has always been Apostle Paul. Because I think he's one who's had so many tragedies in life. Remember, he was shipwrecked. But you know what? He used the opportunity to share the gospel while he was shipwrecked. If you read Acts 22, that's my favorite chapter, he was assailed by an angry mob. And he used it as an opportunity to preach the gospel, not just for self-defense, but to tell his story from being a persecutor to being the missionary for Jesus. He was beaten. I have read, history books, and it says that during those times, what the whip they used to beat the prisoners are like strands of rope. And at the end of those ropes are broken pieces of glass or pottery, broken pottery. So that when they whip the prisoner, it sticks to their body with the broken glass, and then they'll pull it again to do another whipping. Can you imagine the pain, the excruciating pain those prisoners must feel? But Apostle Paul didn't get just one whip. One time he had 39 lashes. Can you imagine 39 lashes with pieces of pottery and glass sticking to your body? And it was not just the whipping, he was also stoned with big stones. He was also threatened by his own people. He really had been through so many tragedies in life. When he was imprisoned, waiting for the trial before Caesar, he saw it as an opportunity to witness for Jesus. He was guarded by the Praetorian Guard. And in fact, he was chained to a guard every time. He was always chained to a guard. If he was not chained to the wall with the shackles, he was chained to a guard. But you know what? He used that opportunity as a one-to-one witness. He was always preaching or sharing the gospel to the Praetorian Guard that he was chained to. So when I was reading this, I said to myself, I can just imagine what the guards must be talking when they go to report for duty. They must be saying, "Are you assigned to Paul today? You better shut your ears because he will not stop talking about Jesus." Because that's what he did the entire time. He was always sharing Jesus. Do you share Jesus? Do you share Jesus Christ with the people that you meet in life? 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18, rejoice forevermore. Pray without ceasing, and everything give thanksgiving, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus. You see, Paul was a very effective witness, one man at a time. As Christians, there are two ways to look at every situation. When the situations are bad or good, we have to see how it will affect you and how it will affect God's kingdom. Paul's secret to happiness, even when he was going through all the trials and imprisonment, was anchoring his joy in Jesus Christ. That's why in our memory verses, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Philippians has only 4 chapters, and it is the most joyful book in the Bible. In these 4 chapters with 104 verses, he mentioned the word joy or rejoicing 16 times, because to him it was very important to rejoice and to be happy. Because his formula for happiness was summarized in these words: "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." He found purpose by focusing on God's glory and his eternal reward. Life is difficult. We'll say probably just for some, but truly, in our own way, we do pass through difficulties in life. The person you meet every day maybe have a smile on your face, but you don't know the burden they're carrying, because we don't walk around with a tag hanging saying, "I'm depressed, I'm desperate, I'm in pain." We don't see that. Maybe we see them smiling, but each one of us are carrying burdens of our own. Wouldn't it be nice if we can share a bit of kindness to every person we meet in life? Because the fact of the matter is, we live in a cruel and grumpy world, a messy world. Tragedy still strikes. Children die. Terminal cancer still exists. Planes crash. Accidents happen. Marriages break. Sometimes people lie about us, and we are very affected with their lying through gossip. And we are sad. We're desperate. We do live in a messy world, but we have a choice how to respond to the hurts and the heartaches of life in this messy world. The question is, how do we live every single day with full joy and contentment? I think the lesson I would like to give to you today is, number 1, begin its day with gratitude. Start its day thanking God for the little ordinary things that you're enjoying. Joni Eareckson used those, and that was her secret in being happy all her life. Number 2, spread kindness and serve others. Philippians 2:3-4 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Move from inward selfish ambition to serving others by encouraging others in their ill circumstances and sharing the Lord's love to others." Our personal testimonies of overcoming bad situations can be a lesson and a blessing to others. Ask God. I always tell myself, ask God to make you aware of how He could use your present circumstances to bless others. Sometimes our joy can be found when we stop looking inward and looking outward and see what others I see. Serving others with a heart of love and humility aligns us with God's will and fills our lives with purpose. Because we do not really know what people are going through. I remember before the pandemic, I left my job as a nurse and I decided to stay home and travel. And when I'm not traveling, I was so bored. I missed working so much. So what I did, I opened an Airbnb in our house against my husband's. He said, "Are you crazy?" I said, I miss meeting people. So 2 of our rooms, we did it for Airbnb. And we live in Yorktown, in the historic triangle. So in the summer, see hundreds of visitors from all over the world. I was so busy. Those 2 rooms were always so full. Then one day, there was this lady from Atlanta who came to stay. She was alone. So I gave her the best room that has a restroom connected to it. But I was worried because she was a huge lady. And she was elderly and she has a cane. I said, and the bedrooms are upstairs. I said, I feel so bad for her. And my husband's office is downstairs, but it was not ready for a guest because I would have offered it for her because she had a hard time going up and down. So I pray, I hope she will just go out and explore and not stay home because how can I keep her busy so that she will not keep going up and down the stairs, But then she never really went out exploring. She said she came to visit her family. So she would go see her family and then in the afternoon she'd come back to the house. And so I have to entertain her. We got to talking to each other and I got to know she was a nurse, but she left nursing and she was a very sad lady. She stayed with us for 4 nights. She would go every day to her family and then come back. And then she said goodbye. Her nephew picked her up and then she flew back to Atlanta. She left a note for me in a very small, beautiful notebook, but it's very tiny. And in it she said, "Raylene, I just want to let you know that my purpose in coming here was to say goodbye to family because I'm tired of living." That she had so many medical issues that she was so tired. But she said the times you spent with me in your kitchen while cooking your Filipino food and talking about your travels made me realize that there's still a beautiful life out there that I need to explore. I never knew that was her purpose in going there. I was just there, and I was even saying, "Oh, here she is again. I have to entertain her," at the back of my mind. But because she's my guest, I have to really entertain her. But you see, you never know. You never know what's going on in some people's lives. So it's very important that we share a little bit of kindness to someone we meet, wherever we are. But kindness usually, when there is a big catastrophe like a pandemic, kindness shows. Remember when there's a pandemic, people tend to help. I remember during the COVID, I made 4,000 masks to give away to workers because there was no mask available. But I didn't do it myself alone because some of you gave me your fabrics, your elastic tapes, and many others so that I could keep on sewing. And we were able to share to the nurses and doctors all over. I actually mailed it to California, even to Australia, because at the time there were no masks available. But so was it during World War II. As you remember, World War II was one of the horrific events in history. 85 million died, and 57 million died from activities directly related to war and through diseases. But there were a lot of stories about kindness. Don't you love watching those movies about concentration camps? I do, maybe because I have been to Auschwitz myself, and I saw how they really lived during the World War II. And I just love these stories. And one particular story really hits me because One time during World War II, one prisoner escaped that morning from Auschwitz. And because one prisoner escaped, 10 have to be punished for allowing that prisoner to pass. So the 10 prisoners had to be moved to row 11, which is an underground bunker. And they are going to be punished with starvation, which means they will not be fed. Can you imagine that as punishment? And so 10 people were chosen that day to be punished, and one of them screamed. His name was Francisek Gavowizik, and he said, my children, my wife," he cried. And then another prisoner heard him and said, "I will go to bunker 11 in his place." Would you have done that? Maximilian Kolbe decided to take the place of Francisek to go to bunker 11 to starve to death. But who was he? Who was Maximilian Kolbe? It turns out he was a priest. He's a Polish priest, and who has been a missionary to Japan, to India, and first in Rome. And during World War II, that's why he was imprisoned, because he was actually able to save 3,000 Jews by hiding them in the monastery. That was his story. His whole life in the monastery wasn't useless, because he used it to serve others, to save almost 3,000. And that's why he was imprisoned. And yet, even during his imprisonment, he still gave up his life for someone who was in need of his service. And if you go to the Anglican Westminster Abbey in London, at the West Gate, you will see statues of these 20 martyrs, and he is one of them, Maximilian Kolbe. Kindness is one of the most beautiful expressions of humanity. Everyday kindness, random acts of kindness can banish fear, soothe the pain, and revive hope. The power of kindness is undeniable. It can be one of your most superpower. If you unleash it in your life, a domino effect will really show, because kindness spreads kindness. Our last lesson is focus on God's presence in your life. When we feel overwhelmed with life's struggles, holding on to the promise that God has a plan for us helps us to look beyond all the trials, so we can still be joyful and happy in the situation that we are in. Philippians 4:11-13, Apostle Paul says, "I have learned in whatever situation I find myself in. I know indeed how to live in humble circumstances. I know also how to live in abundance. In every circumstances and in all things, I have learned the secret, that I have the strength for everything, because I have him who empowers me." There is no time or situation where the joy of the Lord should be absent in our hearts. We should always be happy. We should always be joyful. I remember growing up as a teenager, my favorite singer is the Heritage Singers. How many of you love Heritage Singer songs? Do you know the song, Happiness Is? I love that song. Happiness is, maybe, can you turn it on so we can all sing? The tomb is empty, he lives, so we should all rejoice.